The helicopter blades sliced through the thick Portuguese fog as Cristiano Ronaldo stared out at the endless mountain range below. "This charity match better be worth it," he muttered, adjusting his diamond-encrusted watch. Beside him, Iker Casillas was unusually quiet, his weathered goalkeeper hands gripping the armrest. "Something's wrong," Casillas whispered, his voice barely audible over the rotor noise. The Spanish legend's instincts had saved countless goals, and now they were screaming danger. The pilot's face had gone pale, sweat beading on his forehead as he frantically worked the controls. "Mayday! Mayday!" The pilot's voice cracked through the radio static. "We're going down!" Engine failure over the Serra da Estrela. The helicopter lurched violently, throwing both footballers against the cabin walls. Ronaldo's perfectly styled hair whipped across his face as gravity took hold. The impact shattered the night. Metal screamed against rock as the helicopter tumbled down the mountainside, leaving a trail of sparks and debris. When the dust settled, an eerie silence fell over the crash site. Two figures crawled from the wreckage, bloodied but alive. "Iker, can you hear me?" Ronaldo's voice echoed through the darkness. His designer suit was torn, revealing cuts across his muscular frame. The Portuguese superstar had survived worse tackles, but this was different. This was real terror, not the manufactured drama of football. Casillas emerged from behind a twisted piece of fuselage, his Spain national team jacket stained with blood. "I'm here, Chris." But the pilot, he didn't finish the sentence. They both knew. The man who had been joking about Real Madrid's latest transfer just minutes ago was now silent forever. The mountainside stretched endlessly in all directions, shrouded in an unnatural fog that seemed to move with purpose. No lights, no signs of civilization. Just jagged rocks and twisted trees that looked like skeletal fingers clawing at the sky. Ronaldo's phone showed no signal. "We need shelter," Casillas said, his goalkeeper's tactical mind already working. The temperatures dropping fast, as if summoned by his words. A bone-chilling wind swept through the crash site, carrying with it the scent of something ancient and wrong. That's when they saw it. A dark opening in the rock face, barely visible through the swirling mist. It called to them with an inexplicable pull, like a striker drawn to an open goal. Neither man spoke as they gathered what little they could from the wreckage. "I don't like this," Ronaldo admitted, his usual confidence cracking. The five-time Ballon d'Or winner had faced the world's best defenders, but this darkness felt different. It felt hungry. Still, they had no choice. The mountain night would kill them before dawn. The cave mouth loomed before them like a giant's maw, teeth of jagged stone glistening with moisture. Casillas used his phone's flashlight to peer inside. The beam seemed to die just meters into the tunnel, swallowed by in darkness so complete it had weight. "At least it's dry," Casillas said, though his voice lacked conviction. The cave felt wrong, like stepping into the throat of some primordial beast. But with the storm clouds gathering overhead and their breath-forming clouds in the freezing air, they had no alternative. The tunnel wound deeper into the mountain's heart, defying logic with its smooth walls and perfect proportions. No natural force could have carved such geometric precision. Ronaldo's fingers traced the stone, finding symbols that predated any known civilization. "Look at this," he whispered, his voice carrying an edge of hysteria. The symbols seemed to shift and writhe in the flashlight's beam, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly. Ancient mathematics that followed rules older than human understanding. Casillas felt the weight of centuries pressing down on them. His legendary reflexes, honed by decades of split-second decisions, were useless here. Every instinct screamed retreat, but the tunnel behind them had somehow become a maze of branching passages they didn't remember walking through. "We're lost," he said simply. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Two men who had conquered the world's biggest stadiums, reduced to scared children in the belly of something that shouldn't exist. The first sound came from everywhere and nowhere, a low vibration that seemed to emanate from the stone itself. It wasn't quite a growl, not quite a whisper, but something that bypassed the ears and spoke directly to the primitive fear centers of their brains. Ronaldo's flashlight flickered and died. In the absolute darkness, they heard breathing that wasn't their own. Something massive moved in the shadows, displacing air with each calculated step. The Portuguese forward, who had never backed down from any challenge, found himself frozen. "Don't move," Casillas breathed, his goalkeeper's instincts taking over. He had spent his career reading the movements of strikers, anticipating their next move. But this thing moved with purpose beyond human comprehension. The breathing stopped. In the silence, they could hear their own hearts hammering against their ribs. Then, impossibly, a voice spoke from the darkness. It was their own voices, speaking words they had never said, in languages they had never learned. "Welcome, champions," the voice said, using Ronaldo's vocal cords but speaking with the authority of eons. "You have entered the realm where victory and defeat lose all meaning, where the greatest achievements turn to dust and shadow." CASILLAS felt reality shifting around them like sand. The tunnel walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with each heartbeat. His most famous saves flickered through his mind, but now each one felt hollow, meaningless against the vast indifference of whatever ruled this place. "What do you want?" Ronaldo demanded, his ego refusing to be completely crushed even in the face of cosmic horror. The thing in the darkness laughed, a sound like breaking glass mixed with the death rattle of dying stars. "Want?" it replied, still wearing their voices like stolen clothes. "I want nothing. I am the void between moments, the space between breaths. I am what remains when all the cheering stops and the crowds go home." The darkness began to show them things, memories that belonged to others, futures that would never come to pass, alternate realities where their greatest triumphs had never occurred. Ronaldo watched himself missing the penalty that would have won Portugal the World Cup. CASILLAS saw every goal he had ever conceded, but magnified, distorted, turned into monuments to failure. The 2010 World Cup final became a nightmare where he fumbled every save, where Spain's golden generation crumbled because of his mistakes. "These are not real," he said, clinging to sanity like a drowning man clutches driftwood. But even as he spoke, he felt the memories becoming real, replacing the truth with something darker, more painful. "Reality is negotiable here," the voice whispered. "Champions are made and unmade with equal ease. Your legends are just stories, and stories can be rewritten." They began to notice the repetition, the same conversations, the same fears, the same horror cycling endlessly. Had they been walking for hours or years, time lost meaning in the bowels of the mountain, becoming as fluid as the shadows that danced around them. Ronaldo found himself saying the same words over and over, "We need to get out of here." But each time, the words meant less, carried less weight. They were becoming echoes of themselves, trapped in a loop of diminishing returns. "I've been here before," CASILLAS realized with dawning horror. "We've had this conversation before. We've been trapped in this moment for how long?" The question hung in the air, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. The entity fed on their confusion, growing stronger with each repeated cycle. It was learning from them, studying their patterns, their fears, their hopes. Soon it would know them better than they knew themselves. "Who are you?" Ronaldo asked his own reflection in a pool of water that shouldn't exist. The face looking back bore his features but not his memories. This other Ronaldo had never left Madeira, never learned to kick a ball, never dreamed of glory. Identity began to slip away like water through cupped hands. Were they really Cristiano Ronaldo and Iker Casillas, or were they just two men who had convinced themselves they were champions? The cave whispered alternative histories, probable lives, statistical inevitabilities. "I was born in Stoles," Casillas said, but the words felt wrong. Had he been born there, or was that just another story the darkness was telling? His World Cup winner's medal felt like a prop, a fake memory implanted by something with too much power. The entity laughed again, and this time it sounded like stadium crowds cheering for someone else. "You are everyone and no one," it said. "You are the sum of all possible failures, the intersection of all broken dreams." Days or decades passed. They had stopped trying to escape, stopped believing escape was possible. The cave had become their world, their reality, their prison. Food appeared when they needed it, strange fruits that tasted like childhood memories and bitter regrets. Ronaldo's famous confidence had eroded to nothing. The man who had once declared himself the best player in the world now questioned whether he had ever kicked a ball. His muscles, once perfectly maintained, began to atrophy from disuse and despair. Casillas found himself making saves against goals that existed only in his mind, diving desperately to stop shots that would never come. His hands, once sure and steady, trembled with the weight of infinite possibilities for failure. "Maybe we deserve this," Ronaldo whispered one day, or night, or epoch. "Maybe this is what happens to people who think they're special, who believe their own press releases." But in their lowest moment, something sparked. A fragment of the brotherhood that had existed between them as teammates, as competitors, as men who had shared the highest peaks of athletic achievement. They looked at each other and saw not failure, but humanity. "You were Iker Casillas," Ronaldo said with sudden clarity. "You won the World Cup. You saved Spain. You were the saint of the goal." The words carried power, pushing back against the entity's whispers of doubt and dissolution. "And you are Cristiano Ronaldo," Casillas replied, his voice growing stronger. "You scored impossible goals. You lifted Portugal. You refused to accept limits. Each word was a weapon against the darkness, a declaration of identity in the face of cosmic indifference. The entity recoiled, its form becoming visible for the first time, a writhing mass of rejected possibilities, failed dreams, and abandoned hopes. It was everything they might have been if they had given up, if they had accepted defeat. "We reject you," they said in unison, their voices carrying the authority of men who had conquered the world's greatest stages. "We reject your version of reality. We reject your despair." The cave walls began to crack, reality reasserting itself against the entity's manipulations. Real sunlight began to filter through the fissures, burning away the shadows that had held them captive for so long. The entity shrieked, a sound like 1,000 defeats happening simultaneously. It lashed out with tendrils of pure negation, trying to drag them back into the cycle of doubt and self-destruction. But they had remembered who they were. "Champions don't quit," Ronaldo said, his swagger returning like a tide. "We don't accept defeat. We don't accept impossible." He grabbed CASILLAS' hand, and together they pushed forward through the collapsing nightmare. The tunnel system revealed itself as it truly was, a natural cave system, dangerous but navigable. The entity's influence waned with each step they took toward the light. Behind them, they could hear its death throes, the sound of a cosmic parasite starving. They emerged into dawn, bloody and exhausted but alive. The helicopter wreckage was exactly where they had left it, covered in morning dew. But when they checked their phones, they discovered only 6 hours had passed since the crash. "Did that really happen?" CASILLAS asked, staring back at the cave mouth. In the daylight, it looked ordinary, almost welcoming. "Just a hole in the rock, nothing more." "Does it matter?" Ronaldo replied, already plotting their survival strategy. "We're alive. We're us. Everything else is just..." He paused, searching for the word. "Just noise." The rescue helicopters found them by noon, guided by the crash site's emergency beacon. The paramedics marveled at their condition. Aside from cuts and bruises, they were remarkably intact for crash survivors who had spent the night in the mountains. "You two are lucky," the lead paramedic said, as they loaded them onto stretchers. "Most people who crash in these mountains are never found. There are stories about caves that swallow people whole, make them disappear forever." Ronaldo and CASILLAS exchanged glances, but said nothing. Some stories were too impossible to tell, too personal to share. They had faced something that existed in the spaces between reality, and they had won. The media called it a miracle. Two football legends, surviving against impossible odds. Their brotherhood strengthened by shared trauma. The truth was simultaneously simpler and more complex than any journalist could imagine. Months later, they would both find their game subtly changed. Ronaldo's finishing became even more clinical, as if he had learned to value every shot, every moment of possibility. CASILLAS' reflexes sharpened to preternatural levels, reading attacks before they developed. They never spoke of the cave to anyone else, but they stayed in touch. Two men who had seen the face of cosmic indifference and chosen to remain human. Sometimes, in the quiet moments before big matches, they would text each other the same message, "Still here." Years passed. Both retired, both became legends in their own right. But sometimes, in interviews, journalists would catch a look in their eyes, a depth that spoke of experiences beyond football, beyond the normal boundaries of human existence. "What's the most important thing you learned in your career?" a young reporter asked Ronaldo once. He smiled, that famous confident smile. But there was something else behind it. "That you are who you choose to be," he said. "Not who the world tells you to be. Not who your fears tell you to be. Who you choose to be." The cave still exists, high in the Serra da Estrela Mountains. Occasionally, hikers report strange echoes, impossible geometries, the feeling of being watched by something vast and hungry. But it remains empty, powerless. Two champions had entered its domain and emerged unchanged in the ways that mattered. They had faced the void and declared themselves real, valuable, worthy of their own legends. In doing so, they had wounded something that fed on doubt and despair. The entity sleeps now, weakened by their defiance. It dreams of other champions, other chances to feed on greatness and reduce it to nothing. But somewhere in its alien consciousness, it remembers the taste of absolute certainty, the flavor of unshakable self-belief. And in boardrooms and training grounds around the world, two legends continue their lives, carrying with them the knowledge that they are more than their achievements, more than their failures, more than the sum of their statistics. They are exactly who they choose to be. Sometimes, that's enough to save the world.